It was the kind of Florida heat that made the air taste like rust and rain. On July 3, 1985, two teenagers from Brooksville were hiking through the pine woods near County Road 476 when they found something wrapped in black plastic. At first, they thought it was just garbage, until one of them saw a strand of blonde hair sticking out from the torn edge of the bag. The police would later call it one of the most brutal and bizarre discoveries in Hernando County's history. Inside the trash bag lay the remains of 34-year-old Laura Whitman, missing for nearly 6 months. A mother of 2. A church volunteer. And the beloved wife of local mechanic Thomas Whitman, who'd spent months pleading on TV for help finding her. For decades, her case would grow cold. Files boxed away. Witnesses aging. Her children moving out of Florida to escape the whispers. But in 2021, a routine DNA upload from an ancestry database triggered a match. And the investigation returned to the one man who swore he was innocent. Because sometimes, the evidence doesn't die. It waits, in silence, for someone to listen again. If you're new here, subscribe to After the Silence for more stories where the truth surfaces decades after the world stops looking. Now, let's go back to where it all began, the winter of 1985. When a quiet town learned that love and loyalty can hide something much to occur. Chapter 1, The Disappearance. On the morning of January 12, 1985, Brooksville woke up under a thin mist that clung to the orange groves and the cracked asphalt roads. Laura Whitman's blue Chevrolet Caprice was still parked in the driveway of her small white house on Oakfield Road. The kitchen light was on, coffee halfway poured into a mug, a slice of toast burned in the toaster. But Laura was gone. Her husband, Thomas Whitman, was the one who called 911. The operator later recalled how calm he sounded, too calm, almost rehearsed. "My wife's missing," he said. "I woke up and she wasn't here. Her purse is gone, but her car's still outside. She might have gone for a walk." At first, nobody panicked. Brooksville wasn't the kind of town where women vanished. It was quiet, sun-drenched, the kind of place where church bells marked the hours and everyone waved when they drove by. But by afternoon, when Laura didn't show up to pick up her children from her mother's house, concern turned into dread. Her sister, Debbie Collins, was the first to arrive. She noticed the small things that the police missed, the broken ceramic cross by the nightstand, the indentation on the mattress, the faint smell of bleach in the bathroom. Tom said she left after an argument, Debbie told detectives. But Laura never left without her kids. The official report described Laura as a white female, 34 years old, 5'5", blonde hair, blue eyes, last seen wearing a pink house robe and slippers. Within hours, the Hernando County Sheriff's Department began canvassing the area. Neighbors said they'd heard raised voices around midnight. One recalled a car door slamming. Another said she saw Tom loading something into his pickup truck before dawn. None of it was enough to justify an arrest. That night, local news stations aired Laura's photo, a smiling woman holding her son at the county fair, a sunflower pinned in her hair. The anchor's voice trembled slightly when she said her name. Cases like this didn't happen here. Not in small-town Florida. Meanwhile, Thomas played his part. He gave interviews. He printed flyers. He organized volunteer searches through the woods. He cried on camera. "Laura, if you can hear me, come home," he said in one broadcast, gripping a photo of their wedding day. "We just want you safe." Behind the camera, investigators were divided. Detective Mark Leland, newly transferred from Tampa, believed Thomas was involved from the start. "He looked straight at me when he said she was missing," Leland wrote later in his notes. But his eyes didn't move when he cried. Weeks passed. The case grew colder by the day. The police found no signs of forced entry, no financial motive, no witnesses. The forensics came back clean, too clean. The bleach in the bathroom had erased everything. By February, missing person posters had started to fade in the Florida sun. Reporters moved on to other stories. But not everyone forgot. Laura's mother, Evelyn Grant, continued to call the sheriff's office every week. Her voice got weaker with each call. "Have you checked the rivers?" she'd ask. "What about the woods by the old county line?" Detective Leland did check. In March, he organized a grid search of the area surrounding the Withlacoochee Forest. Over 30 volunteers combed through pine needles and swamp brush. They found old beer cans, a rusted bicycle, a half-buried tire, nothing else. The rain had washed away everything. By April, Thomas had returned to work at his auto shop. People whispered when they saw him buying groceries, refilling gas, attending Sunday service. He stopped wearing his wedding ring. A young woman named Kendra began showing up at the shop around that time. She was 27, worked at a diner, and didn't believe in gossip, as she told her friends. Within months, she was living with him. Detectives noticed. The community noticed. Laura's family, too. When Evelyn confronted him outside the hardware store, witnesses say Thomas didn't even flinch. "You buried her," she screamed. "You buried my daughter." He just turned, said nothing, and drove away. Summer came and went. Then years. The case file was transferred from one investigator to another, its corners softening, photos fading. Evidence sealed in plastic, stored in a basement drawer marked unsolved. For almost 4 decades, that drawer stayed closed. Until a new detective, curious about old Florida cold cases, decided to reopen it in 2021, and found one piece of evidence that had been overlooked for years, a plastic trash bag tag with a partial fingerprint. A fingerprint that, once processed through modern DNA technology, would change everything. Chapter 2, The Trash Bag in the Woods. The woods near County Road 476 were quiet that afternoon, too quiet, the kind of silence that feels staged by nature itself. The trees stood high and dense, Spanish moss hanging like torn curtains, the air heavy with the smell of wet soil and pine resin. It was July 3, 1985, 6 months after Laura Whitman vanished, when 2 teenage brothers, Eddie and Mark Duvall, decided to take their new dirt bikes for a spin through the back trail behind their neighborhood. They were racing when Mark's front wheel hit something soft that rolled under the brush. He thought it was a deer at first, until the smell hit him. "Jesus, Eddie, it's a body," he whispered. But it wasn't a body, not exactly. It was a black trash bag, sealed tight with silver duct tape, half buried under pine needles, buzzing with flies. They ran home, shaking. Eddie's father, a retired park ranger, called the Hernando County Sheriff's Office. Within 40 minutes, the woods were sealed off. Deputies moved in with gloves and flashlights, documenting every inch of the clearing. When Detective Mark Leland arrived, he knew instantly this wasn't some random dumping site. The bag had been placed carefully, not tossed. The ground was compacted, the soil disturbed only once. Whoever left it there knew this land, someone who'd hunted, maybe fished here. Someone local. The forensic team slit open the plastic. Inside were skeletal remains wrapped in a pink bathrobe. The same robe Laura Whitman had been wearing the night she disappeared. Her wedding ring was still on her finger, the diamond cracked in half. Leland didn't speak for several seconds. He'd seen death before, but this one felt personal, the way the killer had cleaned her, arranged her, even folded the robe's belt neatly under her neck. There was no chaos, no frenzy. It was control. The coroner's report came 3 days later. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the skull. No defensive wounds. No signs of sexual assault. But there was one detail that made Leland pause: traces of automotive grease found beneath her fingernails and on the inside of the robe's collar. Mechanic's grease, the lab tech said. Same type used for brake lines. Leland didn't say a word, but everyone in that room knew what he was thinking. That evening, news vans parked outside the Whitman house. Reporters shouted questions at Thomas as he stood on the porch, cigarette trembling between his fingers. He looked thinner, paler. Some neighbors said he'd lost 20 pounds. Others swore he'd been seen laughing with Kendra at the bowling alley just the night before. When a journalist asked if he believed the remains were Laura's, he simply said, "I already knew she wasn't coming back." It was a strange choice of words, already knew. Detective Leland obtained a search warrant the following morning. The first thing he noticed upon entering the garage was the smell of bleach, the same smell that had haunted him since January. Tools lined the wall in perfect order. But in the far corner, beneath a stack of old tires, he found something that hadn't been touched in months, a roll of silver duct tape, the same brand used on the trash bag. He sent it to the lab. No fingerprints, no DNA. Just dust. Whoever cleaned it had done so meticulously. Then came another clue, small, almost meaningless at first. A box of industrial trash bags found under the sink. Brand, Sunco Industries, batch #47B. When the forensic team compared it to the bag found in the woods, the match was perfect. Thomas didn't deny owning the bags. "Half the town uses that brand," he said. "It's from the hardware store down on Main." Still, Leland could feel the circle tightening. He brought Thomas in for questioning, this time with Laura's sister Debbie watching through the one-way mirror. Leland leaned forward. "Tom, the bag was yours. The tape was yours. She had your grease on her collar." Thomas looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "You think I killed my wife? You think I'm that kind of man?" "I think you're the only one who could have cleaned it up that well," Leland replied. But without hard evidence, there was nothing they could do. The district attorney refused to press charges. Laura was buried in August 1985 at St. Mary's Cemetery. Her 2 children, ages 9 and 6, stood silent beside the coffin. Thomas held their shoulders, staring straight ahead. Not a single tear fell. After that, the case drifted into darkness. The woods grew over the clearing, the path where the Duval brothers had found the bag disappeared under weeds. Thomas sold the house, married Kendra, and moved 2 counties south. Debbie left Florida entirely. Evelyn, Laura's mother, stopped calling the sheriff's office. She was diagnosed with dementia in the late 90s and passed away believing her son-in-law had never been caught because the devil protects his own. Detective Leland retired in 2004. Before he left, he packed Laura's file himself, crime scene photos, reports, interviews, and one small envelope containing the plastic tag torn from the trash bag seam. It was the only item never fully processed, back when DNA testing was still primitive. He wrote a note in black ink. "If anyone ever reopens this, start with the bag." The envelope stayed sealed for nearly 4 decades. Until, in 2021, a new generation of detectives, and a breakthrough in forensic genealogy, finally answered the question Leland had been asking since that humid July afternoon. Who really killed Laura Whitman? Chapter 3, The DNA and the Breakthrough. The Hernando County Sheriff's Department had changed a lot by 2021. The walls were brighter, the computers newer, but the evidence room still smelled the same, like dust, cardboard, and time. Rows of metal shelves stacked with boxes marked unsolved stretched into the shadows. It was there that Detective Rachel Myers, newly assigned to the cold case unit, first found the envelope. Rachel wasn't from Brooksville. She'd transferred from Jacksonville, with a degree in forensic genetics and a quiet obsession with forgotten cases. Her first week on the job, she made a promise to herself: she would pick one file from the shelves, at random, and see how far modern science could go. When she pulled the box marked Whitman, Laura, 1985, it was coated in a thin layer of dust. Inside, faded photos of the trash bag in the woods, typewritten interviews, and a yellowed note signed by a name she didn't recognize. "If anyone ever reopens this, start with the bag. Detective Mark Leland." That was enough to hook her. Rachel brought the evidence to the lab. The plastic tag from the bag scene was small, brittle, the ink almost invisible. But she noticed something under the magnifier, a faint smudge near the corner, too uneven to be dirt. She swabbed it, labeled it specimen #47B tag, and uploaded the DNA sequence into CODIS, the combined DNA index system. No matches. For most detectives, that would have been the end of it. For Rachel, it was just the beginning. That same year, Florida launched a pilot partnership with a private company specializing in forensic genealogy, the same method that had helped catch the Golden State Killer. The idea was simple: if the suspect's DNA wasn't in the criminal database, maybe a relative's was in a public ancestry site. Rachel requested authorization. It took 3 weeks of paperwork, 2 legal reviews, and 1 tense meeting with the county prosecutor. When she finally got approval, she sent the sample to Helix Gene Forensics. 2 months later, a name came back. Match, second cousin level, Douglas Whitman. Rachel froze when she read the surname. Douglas was Thomas Whitman's nephew, living in Tallahassee. His family tree matched perfectly with the old records from Brooksville. The algorithm's probability chart left no room for doubt: whoever left that DNA was a direct paternal relative of Thomas Whitman. The reopening of the case drew quiet attention. Rachel pulled the original reports, autopsy photos, and witness statements. What she found painted a story that had been hiding in plain sight. In 1985, detectives had never tested the rope fibers used to tie the trash bag. Technology back then couldn't extract trace DNA. But now, a single cell could be enough. She located the evidence at the state archive, sent it for microDNA extraction, and waited. When the results came in, her supervisor, Lieutenant Alan Brooks, called her into his office. He didn't say anything at first, just handed her the report. DNA match, 99.982% probability, sample consistent with Thomas Whitman. Rachel stared at it for a long time. It was the kind of moment every cold case detective dreams about, and dreads. The next morning, she drove out to the old address where the Whitmans had lived. The house was gone, replaced by a car wash. The woods where the trash bag was found had been cleared for a housing development. Time had erased the landscape, but not the crime. She found Detective Mark Leland living alone in a retirement community outside Tampa. He was 81, frail but sharp-eyed, sitting on a porch with a coffee mug and a stack of old case notes. When she told him about the DNA hit, he went silent for nearly a minute. Then he smiled, not out of joy, but relief. "Took long enough," he murmured. "I told them the bag was the key." Rachel promised him she'd finish what he started. The next challenge was tracking down Thomas. After Laura's murder, he'd remarried twice. Kendra had left him in 1991, citing emotional cruelty. His second wife, Denise, filed for divorce in 2009. He was now 72, living in Ocala, still running a small auto repair business called Whitman's Service and Tire. When Rachel and Lieutenant Brooks arrived, he was under the hood of a pickup truck. He looked up, his hands covered in the same kind of grease that had once stained Laura's bathrobe. "Can I help you folks?" "Mr. Whitman," Rachel said, flashing her badge. "We'd like to talk to you about your late wife, Laura." He didn't flinch. Didn't even blink. "After all these years," he said quietly. "I figured you'd forgotten her by now." They took him to the station for questioning. He didn't ask for a lawyer, not at first. Rachel laid out the evidence one piece at a time. The DNA on the bag tag, the matching rope fibers, the photographs of Laura's robe. "We found your genetic material on the trash bag that held your wife's remains," she said. "That's impossible," Thomas muttered. "You must have mixed something up." "The science doesn't lie," Rachel replied. And neither did Detective Leland. For 2 hours, he denied everything. Then, as the sun began to set through the blinds, his tone shifted. "You ever been married, Detective?" he asked suddenly. "No." "Then you wouldn't understand what it's like when someone stops loving you. When they look at you like you're a stranger in your own home." Rachel didn't respond. She let the silence hang until he finally leaned back, exhaling. "You know what I remember most," he said. "The smell of bleach. I just wanted the house clean again." She looked at him then, really looked, and realized she was staring at a man who'd carried his guilt like a badge of pride for 36 years. When she stood up, he asked one last question. "Will they dig her up again?" "No," Rachel said. "We don't need to." That night, she called Detective Leland to tell him the warrant had been approved. Thomas Whitman would be arrested in the morning for the murder of his wife, Laura Grant Whitman, under Florida Statute Section 782.04, first-degree homicide. On the other end of the line, the old man's voice cracked for the first time. "Thank you, kid," he said. "Now she can finally rest." But Rachel knew the story wasn't over. Because in the world of cold cases, the truth doesn't just set the dead free, it tears open the past for everyone still alive. Chapter 4, The Arrest. The sun had barely risen over Ocala when the unmarked sheriff's car pulled into Whitman's service and tire. The asphalt shimmered under the morning heat, the air thick with gasoline and rust. Mechanics were just opening the garage, rolling up metal doors that screeched like old gates. Inside, Thomas Whitman, now 72, was tightening a bolt on a client's van, humming to himself, the same tune, the officers would later note, he used to sing to his children when they were small. Detective Rachel Myers stepped out of the car wearing plain clothes. She preferred it that way, quiet, no drama. But nothing about that morning would stay quiet for long. She walked up to him, badge ready, the words already rehearsed in her mind. "Thomas Whitman, you're under arrest for the murder of your wife, Laura Whitman." The wrench slipped from his hand and clattered on the concrete. For a second, he didn't move. His eyes drifted toward the open door, sunlight spilling over the workbench like an invitation to run. But he didn't. He straightened his back, wiped his hands on his oil-stained jeans, and said in a voice that was almost steady, "You're 36 years too late." The younger mechanic, Luis, froze beside the car. "Boss?" "Go inside," Whitman muttered. "You didn't see this." Rachel read him his rights as he stared at the floor. "When she mentioned anything you say can be used against you," he chuckled softly. "That's the first honest thing I've heard from the law in my life." As they let him out, the other workers gathered near the entrance. Phones came out, recording. Within an hour, the footage of an old man being handcuffed in front of his own shop was all over local news. Mechanic arrested in 1985 cold case murder. DNA links husband to wife's decades-old death. The past was no longer buried. At the Hernando County Sheriff's Office, Whitman sat across from Rachel in the same interrogation room used by Detective Leland nearly 40 years earlier. The blinds were closed, the light overhead flickering slightly. "You've had a long time to think about this," Rachel said. 36 years, he replied. "You learn to live with silence. It's cleaner than noise." He didn't ask for a lawyer. Didn't fight. When Rachel placed the crime scene photos in front of him, the pink bathrobe, the torn trash bag, the woods, he didn't flinch. He just leaned closer, studying the images as if trying to remember whether they were real. "I didn't mean to kill her," he said finally. "Then what did you mean to do?" "Make her listen." He described the night like someone reading from a script he'd written years ago. Laura had told him she wanted to leave, take the kids and move in with her sister. He'd been drinking. They argued. She slapped him first, he claimed. Then he pushed her, harder than he meant to. She hit her head on the corner of the dresser. "It was quiet after that," he whispered. "Too quiet." He said he wrapped her in the robe because she hated being cold, and cleaned the room so the children wouldn't see the blood. Then he drove her body out to the forest and buried it beneath pine needles, covering it with trash bags to keep the animals away. When Rachel asked about the bleach, he smiled faintly. "You ever try to scrub guilt off a floor? It never really comes out." Outside the interrogation room, Lieutenant Brooks watched through the glass. "We'll get him on first degree," he said. He confessed. But Rachel wasn't celebrating. She'd seen cases like this before, confessions that dissolved in court, technicalities that freed killers. She wanted it airtight. She had the DNA, the confession, and the rope fibers, but she also wanted the story, the truth beneath the evidence. When she returned to the room, Thomas had gone quiet again, staring at the small recorder on the table. "Do you think she forgave me?" he asked suddenly. Rachel hesitated. "That's not for me to say." "I think she did," he said softly. She came to me once, in a dream. Said she wasn't angry. Said I'd punished myself enough. That wasn't her, Rachel said. That was your conscience trying to make peace. He looked up then, his eyes bright with something between fury and grief. Then maybe my conscience should have kept its damn mouth shut. The trial moved quickly. The prosecution presented the forensic timeline. DNA from the trash bag tag matched to Whitman's paternal line. Microtraces from the rope matched his workshop fibers. The confession sealed it. Local reporters filled the courtroom. Debbie Collins, Laura's sister, sat in the front row, her hands trembling in her lap. When Thomas entered, wearing a prison jumpsuit and shackles, she whispered, "You don't deserve her name." The judge read the verdict 2 weeks later. Guilty, first-degree murder. Life without parole. When asked if he wanted to speak before sentencing, Thomas stood, hands behind his back. "She was the only person who ever loved me for real," he said. "And I ruined it." No one clapped. No one cried. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of the gavel. Outside, Rachel stood on the courthouse steps as the press swarmed around her. "Detective, how does it feel to close a 40-year-old case?" "It doesn't feel like closure," she said quietly. "It feels like truth." That night, she visited Laura's grave. A storm was moving in, wind stirring the oaks above the cemetery. She placed a small sunflower on the headstone and whispered, "He won't hurt anyone again." Lightning flashed in the distance, and for a brief second, the engraved name, Laura Grant Whitman, seemed to glow. Rachel turned away, not knowing that in the files still sitting in her office, there was one document she hadn't yet opened, a letter dated 1985, written by Thomas himself and never mailed. It began with 4 words that would soon open a new wound in the case. "To my dearest Laura." Chapter 5, The Letter. 3 weeks after the sentencing, the cold case unit began archiving the Whitman file. Detective Rachel Myers was methodical, labeling each folder by date, tagging each photograph by evidence number. But when she reached the final box, she found something that hadn't been cataloged before, a small brown envelope marked "Found during garage search, not processed." Inside, folded neatly, was a letter. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting uneven but deliberate. The top corner read January 11th, 1985, the night before Laura vanished. Rachel sat alone in her office, the hum of the fluorescent light filling the silence. Then she began to read. "To my dearest Laura. I don't know if you'll ever read this. You've stopped listening to me when I speak, and maybe you're right to. But before you go, I want you to know that I did try. I tried to be the man you married. I tried to be gentle. But the harder I tried, the more you pulled away. You think I don't notice how you look at me now, like I'm something you regret bringing into your house. You talk to me like I'm the noise you can't turn off. I've seen you pack the children's clothes at night. I know about the ticket in your purse. I wasn't supposed to see it, but I did. You were going to take them to your sisters and never come back. You could have told me, Laura. You could have let me keep one piece of the life we built. But you chose to make me invisible. I can't live as a ghost in my own home. If you leave, you'll destroy what's left of me. And if you destroy me, I'll take that with me, all of it. Not as a threat. Just as the truth. You said once that love means never giving up. So I won't. T. Rachel lowered the paper slowly. Her chest tightened. The letter wasn't a confession, it was a warning. A prelude. It showed intent, control, and a mind teetering between love and possession. She turned the page over. On the back, faint pencil marks, a phone number and an address, Debbie, Street, Petersburg. Laura had written it, not Thomas. She had been planning to leave that very morning. Rachel realized the letter wasn't found by accident. Thomas must have left it on the kitchen table for her to see. But she never got the chance. The next day, Rachel visited Debbie Collins, Laura's sister. They sat at a small porch table surrounded by potted plants. Debbie's hands shook as she unfolded the photocopy. He wrote this the night before? Yes. It was never mailed. Then he wanted her to find it, Debbie whispered. He wanted her to be afraid. Debbie looked out toward the horizon, where thunderclouds were forming. Laura called me that night, she said softly. She sounded different. Calm, but tired. She said she was finally going to tell him she was leaving. She asked if I could come early the next morning. Did she mention a letter? No. But she said something strange. She said, he'll never let me walk out that door unless he feels I still love him. Rachel felt a chill crawl down her spine. The line from the letter echoed in her head, if you leave, you'll destroy what's left of me. Back at the station, she added the letter to the official record. It wouldn't change the verdict, Thomas would die in prison, but it deepened the story. It wasn't just about murder. It was about control disguised as devotion, about how love can turn into ownership when someone decides affection is a right, not a gift. That night, Rachel reread the letter one last time before sealing it in the archive. The ink was faded, but one detail caught her eye, the final line, you said once that love means never giving up. She realized Laura might have said that years before, maybe on their wedding day, maybe in a moment of reconciliation. But Thomas had taken it literally, twisting tenderness into obsession. The kind of love that kills doesn't scream or rage. It whispers. It waits. And it convinces itself that it's right. The next morning, Rachel visited Detective Mark Leland one last time. She handed him a copy of the letter. He read it in silence, jaw tightening. I knew he wasn't just angry, Leland said. He was lonely. That's worse. Lonely men don't explode, they rot from the inside out. He closed the letter and looked up at her. You did good, Rachel. But remember, solving a case doesn't always mean understanding it. She nodded, placing the envelope back into her file. As she drove away, she couldn't stop thinking about Laura's last words to her sister, that he'd never let her walk out the door unless he felt she still loved him. In the end, maybe that's exactly what she did. She made him believe she did. And for that fleeting second of peace, she paid with her life. Chapter 6, The Children. When the verdict aired on local television, Michael Whitman was sitting alone in a motel room outside Tallahassee, flipping through channels without sound. He was 42 now, a contractor, divorced, with a face that carried too many years for his age. The screen showed his father in handcuffs, gray hair slicked back, eyes unfocused under the fluorescent courtroom lights. Below, the headline read, DNA links husband to 1985 murder of missing Brooksville mother. Michael didn't move for a long time. He just stared, jaw tight, until the image faded into a car commercial. Then he turned off the TV and whispered. I knew. His sister, Sarah Whitman, hadn't spoken to him in over a decade. She lived in Oregon now, working as a nurse. When the police contacted her after the arrest, she said she didn't want to be involved. But when Detective Rachel Myers found the letter, she decided Sarah had a right to see it. Rachel called her. The voice on the other end was soft, careful. You found proof? Yes. He wrote to your mother the night she disappeared. Don't read it to me, Sarah said quickly. Send it. I'll read it once. When the letter arrived, she sat in her kitchen for an hour before opening it. Her hands shook. The smell of paper and old ink filled the room, like something exhumed. Halfway through, she stopped reading and pressed the page to her chest. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks. Her husband found her that way, whispering. He said she destroyed him. But he destroyed us. Michael, meanwhile, made the drive back to Brooksville for the first time in 20 years. The house he grew up in was gone, replaced by a strip mall. The pine woods where his mother's body was found were now part of a gated subdivision called Whispering Oaks Estates. He parked on the edge of the property line, where the old trail used to be, and walked until he reached the fence. The hum of cicadas filled the air, the same song he remembered from childhood nights when his mother tucked him in. He knelt down, pressed his palm to the dry soil, and tried to remember her voice. All he could hear was silence. Detective Rachel met him 2 days later at the sheriff's office. He'd requested to see the letter too. She handed him a copy, sealed in a plastic sleeve. He read it slowly, expressionless, until he reached the line, "If you leave, you'll destroy what's left of me." He set the paper down and looked at Rachel. "He used to say that to her," Michael murmured. "Whenever they fought. Whenever she tried to take us to Grandma's. 'You'll destroy me, Laura.' Over and over. I was 9, but I remember." "Do you remember the night she disappeared?" He nodded. "She tucked us in early. Said we'd go to Aunt Debbie's the next day. Then I heard them arguing. Something fell. Then silence." He swallowed hard. "In the morning, Dad said she'd gone for a walk." Rachel listened quietly. He wasn't crying. The emotion was buried too deep for tears. "I spent years trying to believe him," he said finally. "Even after Grandma told me not to. Even after the police stopped calling. He'd look at me and say, 'She's still out there, son. She just got tired of us.' And I believed it, because the truth was worse." He paused, eyes fixed on the letter. "I guess part of me still wanted to forgive him. But reading this, there's nothing left to forgive." Later that evening, Sarah flew in from Oregon. The siblings hadn't seen each other since their father's second wedding. They met at St. Mary's Cemetery just before sunset. The headstone was simple: Laura Grant Whitman, 1950 to 1985. Michael brought flowers. Sarah brought the letter. They stood there in silence for a long time. Finally, Sarah said, "You look like her now." "You sound like her," he replied. She unfolded the letter and placed it on the grave, weighing it down with a small rock. "He wrote this to control her," Sarah said. "But now she gets to keep it. He doesn't own her words anymore." Michael nodded. "Mom always said love wasn't supposed to hurt," he whispered. "But I think she knew it might kill her someday." They didn't cry. They just stood there, 2 grown children staring at a name carved in stone, knowing that their whole lives had been built on a lie. As they walked back to their cars, Sarah stopped and looked over her shoulder. "Do you think she forgave him?" she asked. Michael shook his head slowly. "No. But maybe she forgave us, for believing him." That night, Rachel drove past the cemetery on her way home. She saw 2 sets of flowers at Laura's grave, one fresh, one fading. She thought about how some cases never really close, not because of missing evidence, but because grief isn't something that ends. It lingers, reshaping itself over generations. In the quiet hum of her car, she whispered the words she hadn't said in court, in interviews, or in reports. She was more than a case. She was a mother who never got to say goodbye. And as the rain began to fall, it blurred the windshield like the world itself was trying to forget what it had finally remembered. Chapter 7, The Confession Tapes. Thomas Whitman had been in prison for 8 months when the letters started. They came once a week, written in uneven block letters, addressed not to his family, not to his lawyer, but to Detective Rachel Myers. At first, she ignored them. Cold cases were about closure, not correspondence. But when the 5th envelope arrived with "Please listen" scrawled across the front, she opened it. Inside was a short note and a cassette tape. "This isn't a confession. It's a correction. T. Whitman, May 12, 2022. Rachel found an old tape recorder in the evidence room and pressed play. The tape hissed to life, the static whispering like breath. Then came Thomas's voice, older, raspier, but unmistakably calm. "I know what you all think. That I lost my temper, that I hit her, that I wrapped her up like a piece of garbage. You got your conviction, detective. But you never asked why. Do you remember the bleach? Everyone does. They said I used it to hide the evidence. But that wasn't it. I used it because she hated the smell. Said it reminded her of hospitals. I wanted her gone, but I didn't want her sent to stay. Maybe that makes no sense to you. It does to me. You found my DNA on the bag. Of course you did. I carried that bag in my truck for years, to clean up after the shop. Maybe she used one too. Maybe she put something in it before she died. You ever think of that? Pause. You won't believe me. No one ever does. The tape ended abruptly, clicking into silence. Rachel sat for a moment, staring at the recorder. Something in his tone unsettled her, not defiance, not denial, but a slow, creeping conviction that he wasn't lying to her, at least not entirely. 2 weeks later, another tape arrived. This one began differently. I used to dream of her. Still do. Sometimes she's in the kitchen, sometimes in the woods. Sometimes she's not angry. Sometimes she is. You want to know the truth, detective? I didn't kill her that night. Long pause, sound of breathing. But I didn't stop it either. Rachel replayed the line 3 times. Did he mean an accident? A cover-up? Or was this another manipulation, a man trying to rewrite his own memory until even he believed it? She requested access to his prison psychologist's notes. The reports described him as lucid but emotionally regressed, with signs of confabulation, the tendency to mix fantasy and reality under guilt and stress. Still, the tapes kept coming. On the 7th tape, his tone shifted entirely. I told you once she said she was leaving. But you don't know what she left behind. There was another man, Rachel. A friend. From church. He came by the night before. I heard them talking in the yard. When I went out there, he was gone. She looked at me like I wasn't even real anymore. That's when I knew she was already dead, not by my hands yet, but by her choice. Static. So I made it official. Rachel paused the tape. Her heart raced, but her training held steady. He was confessing again, but this time, the narrative shifted. He wasn't the man who lost control, he was the man who decided to make her disappearance match the rejection he felt. The letter attached to that tape contained a single line. You called it murder. I called it closure. Rachel brought the tapes to Lieutenant Brooks, who listened in silence. He's manipulating you, Brooks said. He's trying to reclaim the story. Classic narcissist. Maybe, Rachel replied. But I think there's something else here. He's not rewriting the truth, he's reliving it. She had the tapes transcribed and added to the official file. But she couldn't stop listening. Each recording peeled back a different version of Thomas, the grieving husband, the jealous lover, the cold mechanic, the man haunted by the ghost of the woman he killed. By the 10th tape, his voice had begun to crumble. They say prison changes you. It doesn't. It just gives you time to listen to the noise in your head. You ever heard silence so loud it feels like it's breathing? She's here sometimes. Not in dreams, in the room. I can smell her perfume when the lights go out. You think I'm crazy. Maybe I am. But if hell is real, it smells like bleach. The last tape arrived in a plain envelope, no return address, no date. Rachel pressed play, expecting another monologue. Instead, there was only a faint hum, a mechanical whirring, then a man's voice whispering, almost tenderly. Tell them I didn't mean to keep her. I just didn't know how to let her go. The tape clicked off. 3 days later, Thomas Whitman was found dead in his cell, apparent heart failure. No note. No sign of struggle. Just silence. Rachel stood outside the prison gates that evening, the sky overcast, rain threatening again. She thought of the tapes, of the decades of silence, of Laura's last night. Some stories, she realized, never end, they just echo, looping back through time until someone chooses to listen. She locked the final tape in evidence, labeling it simply. Whitman, Thomas, Personal Recordings, 2022. Then she turned off the light. And for the first time since the case began, she didn't hear silence. She heard breathing. Chapter 8, The Echo. The night after Thomas Whitman's death, the rain finally came. Heavy, relentless, the kind that soaked through everything, the streets, the air, the spaces between thoughts. Detective Rachel Myers couldn't sleep. She sat at her desk long past midnight, the glow of the computer's screen casting her face in a dim, cold light. The evidence box sat open in front of her. Inside were all the ghosts of the case, the trash bag tag, the rope, the photographs, the letter, and the small stack of cassette tapes. She picked one up, turned it over in her hand. The label read only, Tape 10, Final. She thought about destroying them, ending the loop. But something stopped her, the same feeling that had drawn her to reopen the case in the first place. The sense that silence was never empty. It always contained something, waiting. She pressed play one last time. At first, only static. Then a faint hum, like wind against a microphone. And then, a voice, not Thomas's. A woman's voice, barely above a whisper. "It's quiet now." Rachel froze. It wasn't clear. Could have been feedback, distortion, a trick of the mind. But it sounded human. Soft. Familiar. She replayed it. Again. And again. Each time, it came sooner, clearer. "It's quiet now." The same words Laura's mother had spoken in 1985 when the police told her they'd found the body. The same words Detective Leland had murmured when the DNA results came back. Rachel leaned back, her throat tight. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe not. Either way, she decided to take it as an ending, not proof of ghosts, but proof that stories, like people, want to be heard before they can rest. A week later, she visited St. Mary's Cemetery. The grass was wet from rain, sunlight breaking through the clouds in narrow beams. The headstone looked cleaner than before. Someone, probably Michael or Sarah, had left fresh sunflowers. Rachel crouched down, brushing her fingers against the cold marble. "It's over," she said quietly. "He can't hurt you anymore." She waited for the stillness that usually followed, but instead, a soft wind passed through the trees, rustling the leaves. For a moment, she thought she heard something, not a voice exactly, but the faintest echo of breath. "Thank you." She closed her eyes, not out of fear, but relief. Back at the station, the Whitman file was sealed and transferred to the archives, Box 047B, final entry logged. Rachel made one last note before locking it away. Some silences are not absence. They are memory, learning how to breathe again. Then she turned off the lights, leaving the room in darkness. The hum of the air conditioner filled the air, steady, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. For the first time in months, Rachel smiled. Because in that heartbeat, faint but persistent, she finally understood what the case had been trying to tell her from the start. Justice doesn't erase the past. It simply teaches it how to echo. Epilogue, after the silence. 6 months later, the Whitman case became another archived victory for the Hernando County Cold Case Unit, a closed file, a solved murder, a line checked off in a spreadsheet. But for Detective Rachel Myers, it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like residue, something left behind that clung to the edges of her thoughts. Sometimes, she still heard the tapes in her dreams. Not the words, just the hiss between them, the static that sounded like breathing. She'd wake before dawn, open her eyes to the dark, and imagine a woman standing in her kitchen doorway, wrapped in a pink bathrobe, smiling faintly as if to say, "You heard me." The human voice, Rachel realized, doesn't end when the body does. It lingers, in recordings, in memory, in the spaces between the living who remember and the dead who refuse to fade. She visited the cemetery once more that spring. The grass was long again, the flowers wilted. She placed a new sunflower beside the grave. "You were found," she whispered. "That's all anyone really wants, isn't it? To be found." Back at the office, she passed the evidence shelves one last time. Rows of unsolved cases waited in silence, their labels faded, their stories asleep. She stopped in front of one box, Whitman, Laura, closed 2022, and rested her hand on the cardboard lid. For a moment, she could almost hear a faint sound from within, a breath, a whisper, or maybe just the hum of the lights. She smiled. Not everything that haunts us wants to hurt us. Some things just want to be remembered. Rachel turned off the light, closed the door, and stepped outside into the warm Florida night. The rain had stopped. The air smelled of soil and oranges. Somewhere, in the hush that follows every storm, the silence finally sounded like peace.